let's get right into it. Okay, I think you all recognize this. If you don't recognize the poster, at
The
least you
original Star
recognize,
Wars.
yep, the original franchise. Now, I'm starting here because a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we wound up with a lot of characters, right? The original episode 4, the plot was essentially, boy meets girl, and they go fight a rebellion, and eventually they win. But there was more to it than that, and that starts, of course, with the characters. And those characters were interesting. So what made them actually interesting? Luke Skywalker, farm boy with a warrior destiny. Now, no spoilers amongst everyone here. Everybody knows who Luke's dad was. Yeah. So he's a farm boy with a warrior's destiny. Keep that one in mind. Han Solo, Harrison Ford looking a lot younger. The smuggler with a heart of gold. And then, of course, Leia Organa, the rebel princess. Now, what do all of these characters have in common? Very simply put, they have traits. And they're opposing traits. You have a farm boy with a warrior's destiny. You have a smuggler. Typically, if you look at stereotypes, he has a heart of gold. And you have a rebel princess. These terms are, for lack of a better term, well, they're opposites of each other, right? So if you're looking at opposites, look at how you have to work essentially to fill in the blanks between these two opposing traits, right? Because this is what they are. They are traits of a character. These traits, if you will, are the cornerstone or the linchpin that your character is going to be based on. It rules your character, how they see, how they think, how they speak, act, what music they listen to, how they dress. And if you get into the mind of your character, which is the whole point of this, you should even be able to figure out what kind of tattoos they would have, if you want to go that far in, that deep into a character. So the trait ultimately defines how a character will react or behave in a given plot line, in a given series of events, how they will react in certain situations in a given scene. We'll cover those two in later presentations, I suppose. So the core point is that these traits determine your character, and different traits will determine how people react to different things. Simplistically, your farm boy does not see this world the same way your princess would. A farm boy and a knight or a soldier, a warrior, are not going to see the same thing the same way. So when you look at Luke Skywalker, farm boy and a knight and a warrior, they should not work. But when you combine them into one character, you get essentially what is an interesting character. Because the traits set up, right? The opposite traits are what make these characters unpredictable. You have the farm boy here doing the knightly heroic rescue. You have the smuggler with the heart of gold. You have the rebel princess. This unpredictability is what makes your characters interesting. And interesting characters are what drive a story, drive a plot, drive a narrative forward. Now, the key thing to note about traits is that they are, in and of themselves, they are reliable. Somebody who's a traitor, you can rely on them to stab somebody else in the back. You know what will happen.
Jack Sparrow.
Something like that. Yeah, to an extent it's accurate, because you know what will happen based on their traits. You know what they will do depending on what trait they choose to use, if you will, in a given situation. For the readers, for the audience, go so far as to say for the players of a game, you never know which trait they'll use. Hence that unpredictability in what will happen with that character. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the wise, mystical, outcast veteran of war. Now, if you look at him, you have his 4 traits here. 4 possible traits. He could have many others, but these are the ones I see as being core to who he is. He's wise, He's a veteran of war, he's an outcast, and he's mystical. Notice how these four traits are actually almost contradicting each other. They don't complement. They create a sense of conflict, a sense of drama. You don't know how this character is going to act in a given situation. As the writer, you control the character's diamond, so you control what they will do, how they will act in a given situation. This is the power you have as the writer. You create the character, you put them in the situations, how they act, how they react, that's all on you. Now, character diamonds is a concept. It's not something I came up with. This is something done by David Freeman originally as a means of creating interesting characters. Now, full disclosure, this is not the only way to design a character, but this is, in my own experience, the most one of the most effective ways to do it. Because if you have four traits that can work together in interesting ways, or four traits that are counterintuitive almost, that don't quite meld or mesh perfectly together, you're creating something interesting by giving your character that bit of internal conflict. So the traits must come together in some sort of an interesting way. For example, here you have someone who's heroic yet sly. He's absent-minded, aesthetical, right? The traits have to be what drives your character. Four is a guide, and it's one I find that works quite well. If you have three or two, you generally wind up with what you call in games your NPC. You have the non-player character, the small character with a minor side role. The classic example here would be Skyrim, the guard that takes an arrow to his knee. He is a side note. He has literally 2 points. He protects, and he's brave or he's courageous. That's it. He doesn't have anything else. So he's one-dimensional. He's flat. But that's okay because that's his purpose within the confines of the narrative of Skyrim. That's all he's supposed to do. So you don't need him to do more. Now, coming back to our Luke Skywalker, the farm boy with a warrior's destiny, he has really big dreams and he wants revenge. Bear in mind, episode 4, his aunt and uncle were killed right out, setting up the whole motive of revenge against the Empire. He's a dreamer because he always wanted to be more than just a farm boy. He has the warrior's destiny. He's going to become a Jedi Knight. He doesn't know it yet, but at the base of it all, he's a farm boy. What in the world does he know about combat? Next to nothing. If I don't show video clips, again, time constraint, but if you remember in the movie, he literally looks down the barrel of a lightsaber. If he turned it on, there would have been no movie left to watch, no series either. So that even in the movie, they showed his naivety, with the weapon from a more elegant era, as it were. Looking again, Han Solo. Skilled smuggler. He's got a heart of gold. He is self-preserving to the point that he will betray other people to watch out for himself. And he's a bit life-hardened. He's a bit bitter in a sense about what has happened to him. He owes, what's his name? Not pizza, what's his name? Jabba the Hutt, right? Money or something. And that's made him very life-hardened, and he's always looking out for number one. Now you look at Princess Leia's diamonds, the same thing. She's a hardcore rebel, but she's still the dutiful, loyal princess. She's intelligent, and she's got a sharp tongue to match, yet she's very supportive of her friends. So you see how these traits all come together, but at the same time, they're all opposites of each other. And that's what creates that interesting character. Now, other characters that are like this, well, all over the media, all over film is the easiest one to find examples of this. Harry Potter, I'd go so far as to say Lord of the Rings. You find characters with similar diamonds, similar concepts. This is, of course, the original Star Trek, what's it, 1970 something. I forget the exact dates. And even the next generation of Star Trek, they all use the same formula of using character diamonds to create an interesting character. So if you want to actually write a story, write a narrative of any kind, for me, the starting point is always the character. Because unless you know who you're dealing with, what they are capable of, how can you write their experience? How can you write their story? Ultimately, write your story, right? So ideally, if you're going to create characters, you'll have some idea of how they look, how they should talk, walk, act. No. Now, when you're designing this kind of thing, these are character sheets, mock-ups. For those in the game development line, you'd recognize these as concept sketchworks from different characters, different artists, movement frame panels, and the like. But you have to really, that's great for the artist, but as a writer, you generally, you won't have visuals to play with unless you're writing a graphic novel, for example. So as the writer, you have to flesh out the character. What I've listed here are just a few of the different attributes, if you will, of a character in terms of physical details, identifying marks, mainly mannerisms, maybe their presence. These are just a few samples of what exactly a writer has to fill out when looking at a character. One of the most interesting characters that is actually not really recognized as a character, Lord of the Rings. Go look at the ring itself. The One Ring. Look at that as a character. And consider carefully how that ring is all we ever see, besides the Great Flaming Eye, is all that we ever see of Sauron. Yet that ring has personality. It has presence. You know, through the eye, of course, it has a means, a way of speaking. You know, of course, it doesn't have much in the way of physical detail or identifying mark, except for the lettering, the Elvish lettering. No, the lettering on it in the dark tongue of Mordor. You know, one ring to rule them all, and in darkness bind them. I'm such a nerd. But yeah, that's the whole point. You know, your character has to be identifiable. So to summarize real quick, if you're looking at creating the characters who are going to be the main characters in your plot, in your story, you're looking at creating a character diamond, which has 4 main traits and has these details on screen now fleshed out in full, so that you as the writer know the character. Then when you put them into a plot and you put them into a scene within your plot, you know how they'll act, how they'll behave, how they'll walk, talk, move, shoot, whatever. You know how they will act. Now, this is useful not just, of course, for your principal character, nominally your protagonist or your hero, but I would say do the same thing also for your antagonist, the anti-hero, the bad guy. Now, I won't go into too much about the antagonist versus protagonist thing here. That comes up later, and I think I'll probably cover that one somewhat in the second lecture in a bit more detail. But essentially, these are your two characters that are going to meet. They're going to interact, fight, fall in love. I'm not sure what your plot is, but that's how you drive events forward, because a story, a narrative, is ultimately about change. The protagonist has something happen to him, nominally done by the antagonist, and how your character reacts to whatever your antagonist has done, that is determined by the traits you set, by their character diamond. So that's how characters fit into a plot and then into the scenes within that plot. So if you're going to move forward here, don't you could call this homework if you want, but I figure that if I give you this, take you about maybe an hour to do it maximum, right? This will give you an idea of what a character can look like, because a character diamond, as I said, 4 traits, that's the base. So you add the details here and then give them a name. Then you want to create a visual description so you know what your character looks like. Then create something short, that explains that description. Think of it as a first impression when you meet somebody for the first time. That's what you're writing here. Now, the key thing here is that your traits have to remain dominant. They have to be at the forefront of the design of your character, right? So here you want to, in a sense, use less is more. Imagery, symbolism, are a lot better to help people get a feel for your character. Simply put, and on my example here, the example here, a war-scarred face tells you a lot more than a long list of military medals won, battle honors earned, etc., yada, 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 right? So that is pretty much it for what I've got in terms of the presentation. Now, what I'll do, just give me a second here, because everything seems to be, my mouse has gone to sleep. Let me wake it up. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pull up one character that I did years ago. Okay, resume share. No, now it's refusing to. Okay, wait, hang on. Stop share. I need to switch to the other display. Where is it? Okay. Can you all see what is basically like a giant wall of text on screen right now in a PDF?
Oh
Now
yeah.
this, yeah, okay. So this was my description for a character, including his backstory and everything. I'll make this file available to you guys to have a look at. So we're not going to go through and dissect this, all right? But what I want to draw your attention to, not that either. Where's page 3? Okay, is that here I basically did what I talked about in the presentation. The character is here, and I've started here to break down, you know, different attributes, different aspects of him: name, age, height, gender, and you start putting in, for example, identifying features. Like in his case, I gave him heterochromia iridium, which is an actual medical condition. In his case, there's the hair, facial hair, you know, race, build, posture, dominant hand, scars and injuries, right? Tattoos, you know. Now, in the context of this character, he's actually a professional hitter, a hitman concept character. So that's why he has a signature weapon that's done in some serious detail here, you know. You can see mannerisms, gestures, and movements, you know. So that's how I did one character, and some of my works over the years have have a lot of, hang on a minute, somebody's trying to get in. Yeah. So some of my characters over the years, some of my works and projects and things I've written, games, narrative, books, things I've ghost written and so forth, I wind up doing one profile like this for every major character. So generally, depending on the nature of the project, you could be writing a minimum, I'd say, of 2 of these, normally an antagonist and a protagonist. In other cases, you wind up writing 9 or 10 of these. Some games, for example, where I've worked on this kind of thing, where you have a lot of heroes and a lot of champions to choose from, Paladins, Overwatch, Dota, Mobile Legends. Believe it or not, for game designers, for game developers, they actually spend a fair amount of time crafting similar profiles for each and every character, that for each and every champion, for each and every hero that you see, that you get the chance to play. So if you want to come in if you want to take a stab at the homework assignment, as it were, feel free. You'll bring that along to the second lecture, which is on Thursday evening. And then from there, you'll learn how to put together, in the next lecture, we'll be looking at the 3-act structure and how you tell a story using that very traditional, but still very effective method of storytelling. Again, there are other ways to tell a story, but the 3-act structure is a classic, and it's one of the easiest for new writers to pick up, because it breaks down things very clearly, step by step, how your plot will flow. Okay, I'm done at the 22-minute mark, so I've got about 20 minutes left for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, fire away.
Yeah, I'm just a bit curious. This is just an opinion question.
Sure.
Do you think about the Star Wars Episode 7's way of character arc?
Okay, Star Wars Episode 7, the entire new trilogy, 7, 8, and 9. Oh boy. There are a lot of opinions here, and I feel that I'm what you call I'm second generation, as in I'm second trilogy. That's when I first picked up Star Wars with episode 1, 2, and 3. So I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for me, there's a jarring disconnect between the first trilogy, episode 4, 5, 6, and then the second trilogy, 1, 2, and 3. And I felt the same thing in 7, 8, and 9. Now, the reason I felt that way about it, mostly because you're looking at literally you're crossing 4 generations, 5 generations here. Storytelling changes over time. What matters to an audience, what matters to viewers, to readers, to players changes over time. For those of us like right now stuck in the MCO, stuck at home in this lockdown, any game, any movie that deals with cabin fever is something we can relate to. The Shining, for example, is a classic movie about cabin fever. That suddenly takes on a new resonance with a lot of people if they watch it now. So in that sense, I'd say that 7, 8, and 9 caters to the next generation of fans and gives them what they want. Episode 7 closed out, paid homage, paid respect to its predecessors, but then you're handing it over to the new guard, the next generation. It's the future fans that are going to keep Star Wars alive, not, not my generation, as it were. Our time has come and gone. Any other questions?
Hello.
Yep.
I want to ask: is it the diamond structure? Is it always necessary to create interesting characters? I mean, aren't there interesting characters where it's mostly not monotonous, like this, not conflicting each other? Yeah,
Uh, can I add
like
something to that, Adam?
Yeah.
Isn't that basically a Mary Sue if like a character doesn't have conflicting traits if they're too perfect?
You wander into Mary Sue, certainly, when your character becomes very, as you say, without conflicting traits. They become very flat. I'm picking up a
Yeah.
terrible echo. So in that sense, yeah, if you're wandering into Mary Sue territory, sometimes that's necessary for your plot. Sometimes you have a character or two like that on purpose. The key thing is that your main characters cannot be that way. Somebody
Have
got a
you
call
ever
somewhere?
created a Mary Sue character, Adam? I mean, for the purposes of plot?
Too many.
Okay. Okay. That, I mean,
Too many.
I just wanted to know because, like, I feel like those of us who are in this lecture right now, we've probably all wandered into fanfiction at some point in time. Fanfiction.net, Archive
I'm
of
still
Apple.
there.
God knows what fanfiction you guys have written. I know I have. But
Fair.
I've seen way too Mary Sue's. Do not call me Mary Sue. Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of them out there, definitely. But as long as ultimately your Mary Sue character serves a purpose of driving the plot forward, most of the time the Mary Sue is a side character and not necessarily should not be the mainstay of the action. Maybe they'll come up a little more front and center in one scene or in one event, but they are there again to drive the plot, to cause change, to help tell the story. So if that's what they do, that's actually okay with me. When it comes to actually writing your story, like sitting down and writing the manuscript, the manuscript, my best advice is write. Just write it down. That's the point of the first draft. Just write it down. Your second draft is where you make the first draft look like you know what you were doing. Okay, seriously. Now, okay.
Probably a quote from Neil Gaiman, something.
Yeah, I sat through his master class. Actually, I paid for
you
that,
did?
so it was
Oh.
worth it, and it was accurate. It's very accurate. Writing is a very aggravating process, especially as a writer. One day, remind me later. I might share my rant on that topic with you guys. Okay, from the chat, Yeah, Daniel Ray actually chimes in and says that 3 to 4 traits just happens to be a good number of major traits to hold, which is true. I said this earlier, and he clarifies and expands a bit on my point. 1 to 2 traits gives you a very simple character, which is great for NPCs, side characters, the guys that come in and are essentially almost disposable characters. You're going to do something and then vanish. And 5 or more traits just becomes a complete mess. They become very hard to relate to, very hard to follow, which then bogs down your story because nobody wants to get attached. Nobody can actually connect with a character that's that confused and that complicated. So, following also from the chat, Venus Slim said that there's no such thing as original anymore, right? Okay, there you're looking at something. If I understand you correctly, you mean that there's no such thing as an original story anymore, or no such thing as an original character anymore. There are two different things there. Okay, in terms of there's no such thing as an original character, the answer to both questions is actually very similar in a sense that you're correct. There is no such thing as a truly original story or a truly original character. What is original is the interpretation of that character or the character that you create. Swordsman, for example, can take many forms. Your ancient, well, okay, your medieval swordsman running around with a long sword is not the same as your Japanese equivalent of the swordsman, the samurai, who is not the same. Again, as for an example, as what's the name of the guy in Overwatch, the one that runs around with a sword?
NG.
NG, yeah, that guy. He's still a swordsman, but they're 3 completely different interpretations. So to make something original, it is how you interpret the character. That comes back to the traits that you put in your swordsman. I mean, a swordsman, for example, highly skilled, but a total and absolute coward. How's this guy going to do in a fight? I don't know. That's a sample character, just 2 traits. Fill out the other 2. Hopeless romantic. And, okay, since I've got a fairly mature audience here, hopeless romantic and a hopeless pervert at the same time. You have 4 traits that clash with each other. You now have a very, very weird swordsman. What setting do you put him into? Well, that's up to you under plot.
Actually, if you do you mind me add a little bit things to this conversation?
Go ahead.
I feel that to be an original character, to write an original character seems to be a bit difficult because if you write something original, where in which line can you separate original to relatability? As in, how is it that you can relate the character? Because the moment when you start relating the character, you can suddenly jot down lines. Oh, this character suddenly feels similar to Luke Skywalker. But if you write something original, people will say this guy's a wacko. This guy's an idiot. Like I don't see any sense that I can see him as an interesting.
Okay, here's the thing. We're coming back to the same question almost. Original is down to your interpretation. Now, when you create your character, 4 traits in the diamond, and then you put them in that flow with events. Remember that as the writer, we'll look into this more on Thursday. You also control the events that you put in your characters into. Let's stick with our horny swordsman for a moment. Okay, take him and then you shove him into, I don't know. Let's say you put him in medieval Europe. Funnily enough, most medieval knights, swordsmen, right? They were also pretty horny. All right, they had a lot of issues. They had a lot of mental problems. So he'd actually blend in quite well. He wouldn't really stand out for his time. So if you're creating a medieval piece, for example, then your character is on the line of believability. Whereas if you take him and you put, for example, well, let's put him on the street outside with his sword and he's running around. He's gonna get shot. He's probably gonna get killed. So here, in terms of originality, you have crossed the line from realism into absurdity almost. Now, if you tell me that your swordsman is running around in modern day Malaysia, but he's smart enough to keep his sword sheathed until he attacks his target in an alley somewhere, you're back in the realms of believability. Okay, looking at the finer points of this comes under plot and more towards world creation, which is a subset of actually setting up your plot. I may now have to do a fourth lecture. Darn it, thanks a lot, Edison, on world design. But yeah, that's how you fit that one in there, in my opinion. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll
I've
turn
got
to
one
the-
actually.
Yep, go ahead.
So, how do you develop a character for a sequel? For example, like how Deckard was developed into Blade Runner 2049, or how Luke Skywalker was developed into Episode 8.
Okay, that one is. Hang on a second. All right, we still got some time. Okay, now when you're looking at franchising and sequels, there normally you see that one a lot in movies or TV shows. They go from season to season. Ultimately, there is for the writers behind that movie, for the writers behind the franchise, they know where things are going. Again, they are the ones that set up the plot, right? Now, as I said, every protagonist has an antagonist. So sometimes you have that repeat returning antagonist that can keep the plot moving forward. In Star Wars, that is, of course, the Empire, simply put, and to an extension, Darth Vader. Then plot twist, the Emperor Palpatine was behind him. Another example of this one where they have an almost episodic nature to their bad guys, the Fast and the Furious franchise. Every installment has been something different. Every installment has had a different bad guy. So that really depends on how you create your world and how you see your story shaping up. That's why most modern fairy tales end with, and then they lived happily ever after until the sequel. Or they got divorced in 20 years, depending on which fairy tale you subscribe to. So that's how I would deal with that. Now, okay, Dushan from the chat chimes in again that he says that one good way to actually, build a story is to start by writing what you're familiar with, draw on your own experiences, right, as a starting point, and then to create that change in your protagonist or your antagonist, depending on how your story shapes up, go back to their diamond and swap out one trait for something else. So a trait that obviously makes sense given the story, given the adventure, given their experiences. He comes back. Dushan also goes on to say that, yep, Luke Skywalker was the dreamer in episode 4 for certain, but by episode 8, he's no longer a dreamer. He's more of a, well, Dushan's word is coward, but I'd say more of somebody who's just given up. He's just blinded and buried in despair. Personally, I wouldn't say he's a coward. He just doesn't see the point in fighting anymore. Because his whole life has been one war after another, literally. First his father, then the emperor, then the empire, then rebuilding it, then the new order. It's just like literally destiny has just been like, shoveling crap his whole life. He's just at the end said, fuck it, I give up. I'm going to go hide somewhere and retire on an island. Which is pretty much what he did. Until Ray came along and he's like, oh, great.
Isn't that the dream though? Retiring somewhere and no one else can find you?
Within reason, yeah, for most of this. Okay, hang on. Will it still, okay, question from Chris in the chat. Will it still be conflict or change into something more perfect? I'm assuming you're referring to the diamond morph? Hang on. Oh, wait, how do you deal with, sorry, I skipped it. How do you deal with a character growth? Does it change the diamond or does the diamond morph? I would say stay safe and change the diamond. Morphing the diamond normally means adding on another trait. This can be done, but then it's dangerous because, again, you run the risk of overcomplicating your character and then your character loses focus. So you don't know what's happening with the character as the writer. Your reader or your viewers, they're going to understand it even less. So I would be very careful about morphing the diamond, but definitely look at changing one trait if you're going to try and serialize or create a franchise. Okay, Narish from the chat, process character versus theme. Where do you begin? Sometimes you have a great theme in mind, then how do you go about it? Okay, this is, okay, hang on a second. Okay, we are at the 38-minute mark, so I'll probably get cut off halfway through. What I'll do is I'm just going to restart the meeting. Everybody who wants to jump back in is free to jump back in. We can just keep this going. Or if you're done for the night, you're done for the night. So that said, process character versus theme. If you have a great theme in mind, then I think you're starting from a completely different place. With a theme, you normally have some message that you're trying to communicate, some experience that you want to share, that you want your reader, your viewer, your player to experience. So if you're going to start with that in mind, then I think you need to very carefully consider whether to start with the character or start with your world first to set up the right environment that will give your theme the existence, well, not so much existence, but give it the presence that it needs effectively. If you're willing to share the theme, maybe we can, and I can work with you like one-on-one or something and help you put something together as a starting point.
Interesting. All right.
All right. Any other questions? Sorry,
Nobody's going to ask, man. T minus, I don't know how many seconds.
20 seconds.
Oh, Daniel chimed in. Daniel came
Okay,
in.
somebody's chimed in here. Character or theme depends on what you thought of first. If theme came first, decide on how you tackle the theme. For example, power of friendship. Then make a loner who learns about the power of friendship. He's right. Any other questions? No questions. All right, then, in the words of my former lecturer, thank you very much for class, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Good night.
Cheers, man. Thanks.
Yeah, bye.
See ya.